Hello, this is Isaac Lundgren. Today we're going to be talking about creating a background illustration image, and that can be used for video game or print or any type of media. I'm going to be going over a few techniques on how to get started. The programs I'll be using are Adobe Photoshop, and I'm going to be bringing them in myself into Unity. Now I've got this scene from a game here, and I need some additional backgrounds to go in this area. One of the backgrounds that I have recently completed is this area here. She'll be able to walk, and there'll be a close-up area over here. Another background that I've recently completed is this area in here. There's a close-up of this tree environment. We've got the large doors, and the character can move through this area. The background that I want to create today will be for this area. It'll be the side of the tree. I'll have a character kind of poke out from behind the tree, and we'll just dive right in on how I approach creating backgrounds for this game. I'm coming into Photoshop. I've got this background already open just to give me an idea on the type of basic shapes of this area that I'll be looking at and diving into here. So the tree is kind of in a cylinder shape. I don't know if I particularly want to show the horizon from this point of view, perhaps, and I may also include a tree in this area as well, and I'll clean up this area and make it look a little more interesting as we get closer. The first thing that I do would be to create a new blank document. File, New. You type in the dimensions that you need. You can go off of pixels or inches. Right now I've got 10 by 6 at 300. This should be an okay dimensions for what I need it for. And I'll call it Great Tree Side View 2. Give it a name. And you'll also want to go ahead and save it as well. We'll come into backgrounds. Go number 67. Great Tree Side View 2. And we'll be saving it directly into here. Now we'll want to just go ahead and double click this background layer and just hit OK. That's going to turn off the lock that was just here. I'll also create a new layer. This will be for our line, our first line layer. Now the first thing I do when I create a new background is to work out the basic shapes first. I'm opening my brush palette here, Window, Brush Presets, and that's this here. Now I've got some brushes preloaded, but we can just use some basic brushes for what we're starting with here today. So I've got a basic round brush. This is one of the default brushes from Photoshop. Any of these hard-edged brushes will do to begin. I've got the size set to 15 pixels and the hardness at 100. And I'm just going to work out some basic shapes for my area. I know I need the side of the tree. I think I'll put that in about here. And that kind of curves underneath about here. It's sort of in a cylinder shape. And actually I think I will put in the horizon. I'll put it in about here. We'll add that secondary tree about here. And we're going to have some kind of barrier here. I don't want her to be able to walk past. We're going to build in a little barrier. It'll be some branches and things coming down. And this will sort of taper off into some ocean on this side. About like this. We had a view of the sun here, and we'll have some basic shapes of some clouds kind of over here about like this. That sets up our scene, and now we need to come in for the line work. So I'm going to come to this layer. I'll turn the opacity down. This will just kind of be my guideline layer. And now that I've got some basic shapes, I'll create a new layer above that. We can call it line 2. And now I can come in and get a little more detailed on some of the elements in this scene. I'm going to start with the tree. That's going to need the most attention. And I'll go base it off of the line work that I've already put in. I'm going to create a new edge. I'm going to show some of those kind of layers of the tree that kind of stack together. I'm not worried about any texture at this point or form. Well, I'm thinking ahead about the form, but I'm not putting in any of the value that I need for the form. I can switch back and forth between my brush and my eraser as needed. E for eraser, B for brush, if you're interested in the shortcuts that I'm using. Also, to get rid of all of our noise that we've got around the edges here, I'm just pressing the tab key and it gives me a blank canvas. Without all of the tools. But of course we need the tools, but we don't need all the tools all the time. So it's handy to be able to just hide them for a little bit while we do some line work in here. Now, I like this all right, but I think I'm going to have to reform some of this area. Now I could erase these lines and kind of redraw them a little higher. I'll go ahead and show you another handy tool here that we can use for that. Filter Liquify brings up our line work into the liquify area, and this first tool here, Forward Warp tool, you can press the bracket keys to change your brush size, and I'm just kind of bringing these curves into a more corrected perspective for this tree. They'll curve a little more at the bottom and less as the tree gets higher. Be about like that, I think. Now before we do any shading and texture and painting, you want to get your basic structure of your lines and shapes in before you do any of the fun detail work. Okay, we're kind of getting that perspective here. Alright, that should be okay. And those changes are made in here, so you can see the difference that made. Now I'll go ahead and work on my secondary, kind of some runoff branches here as a way to make this tree a little more interesting, and also to create a physical and mental barrier for this back area. You want to make it beautiful enough where they don't mind that they're being blocked. And the purpose is to block, because we can't possibly draw every possible area to go, especially when the story dictates that the player need to go in other areas. Just creating some organic movement here for this tree. About like this. Press Command Z or Control Z if you need to back up. Press Command Option Z if you need to back up multiple steps in your history. If you need to see a visual representation of your history, just come to Window, History, and here is all of the steps of our history. If you like the progress that you've made and you're afraid you're going to kind of mess something up, just come into your history palette and tap this little camera button. That gives you a snapshot. So at any point later, you can come to these snapshots to retrieve a previous state of your image. Now those snapshots are temporary. As soon as you close your document, they will disappear. You can save a new version at any point if you really want to make sure that you can go back to a certain point of your artwork. Okay, so again, I'm using brackets to resize my brush. I'm pressing B to as a shortcut to get to the brush tool. I am pressing E as a shortcut to get to the eraser tool. Alright, so that's shaping up pretty nice. I'm going to just add a little bit of form in here. Okay, and a little bit of form. It just helps guide the structure of that branch. And we'll add a little bit of detail in here just to get us kind of started and thinking about a little more detail later. Put that in here, maybe about like that. All right. Now let's move on to this tree in the foreground. And we'll just do a stylized version of a pine tree, and I'm actually going to put this on a separate layer. I'm starting from the top and having these branches kind of come down. And I know we're getting this ugly intersection here, but this is actually going to overlap in front of the background, so that doesn't really matter. Okay. When you're working in a digital space, you can think ahead about your process. So right now, this tree is kind of, well, it's on a separate layer. It'll be in front of those branches, even though right now it's kind of intersecting them. All right, that should be okay for our stylized tree. I'm going to go ahead and hide that. I'll also mark it tree line. And we will, let's see, since I've got the tree in a separate layer, I will come back to this and continue these roots back here, or branches, or whatever these are. I'll just continue them slightly so that they can go behind. Okay, and that should actually be enough to get us started. So what I'm going to be doing next is putting in the values. And by value, what I mean is the gradual transition from light to dark. Let me pull up. I'm going to pull up a Google page here so we can see value scale. Your image should contain a variety of different values. You don't want to just do light and dark. You want to have a lot of gradations in between. And that makes your artwork more interesting. It also is a big way on how we add form to our image. And what I mean by form is making sure that we have a defined light source where we can see the light part of our image, the shadow part of our image, cast shadows. We can begin to see texture within an area. And all of this is done by adding value and thinking about what direction the light is coming from. Okay, so in our image today, if we take a look back at this image here, it looks like the lighting is kind of dim. We've got the main light source will probably be from the back right. We've got a light area in the sky here, and so this part will be lit up. And we also have a secondary light coming from above that is illuminating a kind of purple cast. We also have an atmospheric light that is kind of reflective light coming from the ocean that can light up the right side as well with kind of a soft blue. So we'll do a stronger, more yellow light. We're going to kind of cheat out the yellow light. We'll imagine that maybe it's coming from here. And then we can do the soft blue on the right and the purple coming from above. So we'll keep that in mind. But first we're going to be doing a full black and white. We'll be doing a full black and white value study of our drawing. And to do that, I will add a layer, and I'll put it in underneath the line, and I'll just label it value study, and I'll begin. Now this is also a default Photoshop brush. I've moved it to the bottom so I can have better access to it. It's called Erodible Round 3. This is kind of a handy brush. If you make it too large, it kind of bogs down your processing power a little bit, but if you work with it at a medium level, it works pretty well. When you press down hard, you've got these rough edges, but if you press down soft, you get this really smooth brush that you can kind of blend with a little bit. You kind of just layer it over the top of itself. Okay, so as you can see, we can get a lot of different values just with this one brush, depending on how hard you press down on your graphics tablet device. By the way, if you need more information on graphics tablets, I do have a video out that discusses what an artist's pen monitor or graphics tablet is, and I review one. I review the one I'm using today, which is the Ugee 2150. All right, now let's start with... even before that, I changed my mind. All right, we're going to take this line 2. I'm going to duplicate it. I'll put it underneath the line 2, and here will be my value study. And I'll take this and trash it. I'll come to the paint bucket tool, and I'm just going to kind of put in a medium gray. Okay, and this will go a little lighter. And actually, I'll make that lighter still, and lighter still as it climbs. I'm holding down Option to select this color, and I'll make this darker. And darker still down here. That'll get us started. Now you notice we've kind of got this tiny white gap border. I forgot, I'm just going to click in here a few times. Now since it's behind my line drawing, we still have the lines that are sort of softening those edges, and all the hard edges are going to show up below. Okay, so I'm working on this layer behind my line layer. So my nice lines will always be... and I'm clicking a few times in here, of course. My nice lines will always be over the top of what I'm doing here until I change my mind later. And that's enough to get us started. All right, now I'll get my brush tool again, and I'll come back to that brush I was mentioning earlier. And now I will begin the value study. So I have this medium gray, and I'll start it a little darker. And you know I'm actually going to move this line above it as well, because I do want to be able to see the horizon in here. And now we begin. So I'm just thinking about where the shadows would be, and I'm kind of putting in the shadows. I made everything medium with the medium gray. And we'll come back and put in some shadows. Now, not every shadow is going to be equal, but you kind of work general to specific first. So we're kind of generally putting the shadows in, and then we'll decide what areas need to be darker and what areas need to be lighter, and we can kind of do that as we go. So I'm making these roots, since they're a little farther back, their values are going to start to fade. We won't have as much light and as much dark the farther back you go. We've got more contrast the closer you are. So the front of this tree will have more contrast than these back roots back there. And since this tree is kind of in a cylinder shape, we are making the shadow kind of on this side as well. I'm kind of changing my mind about how I want the shadows to go. It's sort of begging to be lit from the left side, at least somewhat. So I'm going to appease myself and do that. It's your artwork, you can do whatever you want. Alright, adding the shadows on the right here. A lot of times in art, you need to know when to follow the rules, when to follow the elements and principles of design, and you need to know when you can kind of branch off and do your own thing. Especially when you're starting, it's best to follow the rules, to have an established light source. And once you feel like you're doing really well with your basic elements and principles of design, then you can kind of break some of the rules. You can make an informed decision and break some rules, and that's okay. Like I decided it would be more interesting to have a light source here, even though there may not necessarily be a light coming from that direction as strong as I want it. But I'm adding a light source. We'll just pretend this tree is studio lit. So I'm not worried about color at all at this point. I'm just working on the value. And as I mentioned earlier, the bigger this particular brush gets, the more it struggles to keep up with processing power. And this is a 6-core Mac Pro, and it's still kind of struggling a little bit. So feel free to use a less processor intense brush, and I'm sure you can still get some good value in your artwork. I did not start out with a 6-core Mac Pro. You kind of work up with your tools little bit at a time. And when a decade or two goes by and you're still working, or you're still kind of with art, with the digital art, you'll realize that you have compiled some tools that you love. That you may not start out that way, and that is okay. You can do some amazing stuff with some very inexpensive tools. And you can do some amazing stuff with some expensive tools. They're just a little bit different. Some of them make things more convenient. Some of them give you a little more control. But you'll find a way to make it work, whether it's expensive or inexpensive. You'll find a way to make your tools work. And of course, the more you practice your art, the more amazing it will be. I don't always devote enough time to my own art. I teach art during the year, so I help other people with their art, and now that it's the summer, I get to spend a little time on my own art, which currently is game design. Yay! Okay, adding a little bit of a light source on these roots. As I mentioned earlier, if something is farther back, you want the contrast to be not as intense. That is called atmospheric perspective. I'm going to have to make some changes to this tree later, but I'm not going to do that right now. So we're working on the value. I'm just deciding that the side of this tree looks too structured, and I want it to be more free-flowing and organic, which we will do later. Still getting that value study in here. All right, this is looking pretty good. I'm going to push those values darker. Give a little variance to the ground. It's not all completely flat. And I'm almost ready to move back into this area and rework the tree so it doesn't look so cylindery. Oh, I don't know if I've mentioned, I am holding down the space bar to navigate around my image. That's a very handy, common Photoshop trick, just holding down the space bar. And I'm adding space bar and option to zoom in and out while I drag my cursor. Okay. All right, for the horizon, just kind of have a nice medium type horizon here. I'll want to animate this water later. I don't know if we will have time to do that in this video. We will see. Okay, and I need to work bigger and this brush is too draggy. I'm actually just going to switch to the soft airbrush here. It's a soft round brush, and I'm just going to blur in that sky a little bit. Kind of blurring out some of that sand too. All right, now a few tricks. This is still before we add our color. I don't want to add the color yet. Let's work on this sand down here. Now, one way to make sand would of course be to zoom in, get your hard brush, and to put every little dot in for your sand, kind of like this. As you can see, that's going to take a long time. We're gonna, since this is technology, we can use a few shortcuts. I mean, if this was real brush work, we could use some shortcuts as well, such as stippling, just tapping the end of your like 2-inch brush, nice dry brush to create those specks. You could also flick your brush on to create some dots of sand. Of course, the best control will be to just do your dots by hand, but we're not going to do that today. All right, so I'm going to take this lasso tool. I'll kind of gently select, not absolutely perfectly, just kind of gently select my shoreline about like this. I'm going to come to select Refine Edge, and I'm going to feather. We're just going to really soften that edge. There's other things you can do here when working with the selection, but you won't need these really too much. Really, I was just looking for the feather. I'm going to push OK. All right, now I'm going to come here to Filter, Noise, and I'm going to add noise. So here is my add noise thing here, and since I'm in the grayscale, you can see the more noise I add, the more contrast we get. We don't need a lot of contrast for sand. We're going to come down here, maybe about this 11%. We're going to cheat in some sand. That's looking pretty good. If I don't check the monochromatic box, then I get these other colors in here, which I don't need. I'm just going to push monochromatic, and it's going to stay in the blacks and the whites and the grays. Okay, so we snuck in some sand here. Now, as you can see, we've still got some borders that need to be worked out. So I'm going to deselect, Command D, or select, deselect. Well, here it is. It's not available now because I've already deselected. Then I'm going to come back to my brushes, and I'm going to use I believe it's this one. I made a brush called the Dirt Texture. I can show you the properties to it if you want. Which would be available, well, here. I guess that's just window brush. Okay. And my shape dynamics are selected. Smoothing is selected. You can see that if you want to see what is done with this brush here. Okay. I think really it's just based off of one of Photoshop's brushes in here from the default. Alright, well the point is, this brush can scatter some texture. If I press down hard, you just get this kind of textury line. But if I press down soft, it's going to kind of splatter some paint, which is great for faking sand. So I'll take a darker gray, and I'll kind of come over this edge a little bit. I'll take a lighter gray and come over this edge a little bit. I'm going to take some lighter. I'm going to have to rework some of my highlighted areas. I'm going to push in my highlights here. You can use light to kind of guide the eye of the viewer in your background. That is actually something to keep in mind always on your artwork. If there's something important, light it up. If something is not important, turn that contrast down. Make it uninteresting or less interesting. Everything can be interesting in its own way. Okay, so we've got a sand texture for us on this shoreline. Now we need to move on to a texture for this area. Now there's a lot of different ways you can add texture. One way, if you're not sure about something, just put it on a new layer. So actually, at this point, here's what I'm going to do. I'll keep this line 1, but the line 2 and the value study, I kind of want them to become 1 at this point. So I'm going to take the two together. I will first duplicate them and then merge them. I'll turn off the eyeball below in case I want to go back to this state. And I've got everything on the same layer now. Okay. Now in my history, I'm also going to make a new snapshot at this point. We'll go back to my old snapshot and you can see how far we've come. Okay. And now we are ready to move on to a texture for the tree. Now, one thing that you can do, you can come into Google search and type in a type of texture you're looking for. You can locate images. Sometimes they're free use, fair use. Sometimes you purchase them. Sometimes they have these little watermarks in them, and when you purchase them from the content creator, the watermarks will be removed with a higher resolution image. And sometimes you can try free versions, and sometimes you can photograph your own texture. Okay. So what I'll be using, I'll pull in a wood texture here, and really I'm just bringing this in as a sample to show you what we can do with texture. Now, since I'm still not ready for color yet, I'm going to desaturate this. Image, adjustments. Hue saturation. Pull that saturation down. And we have what is called in Photoshop blend modes. You select your layer, come up here where it says normal, and then you get a list of blending modes. What a blending mode is it interacts with the image differently. Sometimes it preserves the highlights, sometimes it preserves the shadows. There's a lot of different things that blend modes do. Even if you understand what each blend mode does, really, you still need to experiment because you'll never be able to understand it on a level to where you can just gaze at something and get your perfect blend mode. Now, as you can see, I picked one that was pretty good for my texture here, which is overlay. You can also turn down the opacity and have a more subtle addition to your texture. You can see I've got a subtle texture here that actually looks really nice. Okay, before I do that, I need more of it up here. Now we're going to just put this back to normal. I'm going to turn this all the way up again. And I'm going to hold down the Option key, bring this up here to kind of put it together. And it's not a seamless texture, as you notice. I'm going to turn that extra line off for a second. You can see the seam. That's fine. And let's go ahead and try to repair that. I'm going to get the marquee tool, rectangular marquee tool. I'll just draw a rectangle over this area. Let's get Photoshop to try to fix it for us first. I'm going to merge these together, and I will do Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and let's see how it does. Patching this area. Deselect. Not bad. It still looks a little blurry on the edges. Okay. So let's try that again. I'm going to make my marquee selection a little higher. Try it again. Edit, Fill, Content Aware. Yeah, that's pretty good. Another way that you can get rid of seams is sort of use the clone tool and try to clone them out. Here's the clone tool. It's cloning something from another document currently. So I'm going to hold down the Option key to set my target, and then I'll just click. And what it's doing is copying the area that I want to have cloned and sort of pasting it all at once, and it's being controlled through the filter of a brush which you can define in your brush palette like normal. I'm leaving mine on this soft round brush here. And actually this will be good enough for what we need it for. I'm going to take this image now and I'll kind of stretch it. Actually, maybe about like this. We want to try to cover those branches as well. Okay. Now let's put this with an overlay. All right, that's looking pretty good. Okay, now since this tree isn't on its own layer, we're going to have to mask out what we don't need manually. Think of a mask as we're kind of like erasing what we don't need, but a mask is temporary, so I could remove it if I wanted to. So I'm going to click on this layer, and let me actually turn that opacity down just slightly. That's pretty good. Now I'll come over here to add layer mask, and this is my layer mask. And as you can see, it gave me black as a color automatically, and I can push B for brush, and I'm getting this color black, and I'll choose a brush that I want to paint my mask with. Let's try my old reliable here, and I can paint out what I don't want to be affected by this texture, which in this case would be the sky. Oop, there is something there. So you need to be more careful right next to your object, and you can be less careful as you go away from your object that you are masking. If you've bumped into your object, let's say I'm working on my mask and I'm like, oh, I didn't mean to mask that area. Just push X and it flips your black, your foreground color, with the white of your background color. And white, of course, is taking away the mask. And I'll push X again as needed to flip. And everything black is being masked and everything white is being revealed, as we can see in this area over here. Okay, so since I need to be less careful with this part, I'm just going to take a less demanding brush. I'm just going to paint that out. Okay. Okay, so we've got subtle traces of that image, and I like how it turned out. So I'm going to commit to that. Before I do, let me just add another snapshot in case I feel like that was the worst decision I've ever made. So my snapshot is up here. I can look back on some progress again. Okay, and I'm going to put these two layers together and just choose merge layers, and now it is all one image again. Okay. Now I kind of wish that this was on a separate image as I work on the background. So I think I'm going to do that. Let me show you how. Let's do a selection using this quick selection tool. It should be pretty reliable in this instance. We've got a nice hard edge on the sides of this tree. I'll come in here and I'm just kind of drawing where I want this selection to be. Okay. And we're going to clean it up in here. And if I don't want something, I can hold down the Option key. And I'm actually going to get tricky here. Let's see. Well, first I'm going to try to select inside this area. Let's see how well we can do. This quick selection tool is relatively new, at least within the past 5 or 10 years. We were not so lucky before then. There's always a way to do a selection, but this tool is particularly handy. Okay, I guess that's good enough for now. Now, we need to take care of this bottom area as well. I'm going to switch to this marquee, and I'm going to hold down the Option to deselect, and I'm going to put my horizon in possibly here. So I'm also holding down the space bar, so now I'm holding down first Option drag, then space bar to move the marquee box. I'm letting go of space bar, and I'll complete this. There. So we've got a horizon here. This is going to be see-through, and this is not. Okay, now I'm going to select Refine Selection, or Refine Edge. Now here's where some of these will come in handy. I'll smooth that edge. And this is also a relatively new feature. Well, within maybe like 7 years. Relatively new. Okay. I'm going to push Command X and Command Shift V, and now I've got this sky on another layer, though we don't need it as is. I may as well just start again on the sky, and I think I will. Okay, first I'm just going to touch up this edge. I'm going to get the brush tool. It's okay if that's a little soft there. And knock that down a little there. Knock that over here. Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this video up in the next 10 or so because we don't want it to go on forever, and I want you to be able to have time for your own art, of course. And let's see. What we need to do now is add color. We've got everything sort of started. I'm just going to do a real quick, just solid color in the background here. Okay, should be good. And actually I'll do a gradient instead. Let's click and hold on this paint bucket and get the gradient tool. For our colors, we're going to choose gray to white, and just kind of click and drag and edit undo until you get where you like it. Okay, like it. And let's do, now we are ready for color. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it foreground color. I'm going to get the brush tool, but instead of normal mode, I'm going to come to color. I'll come into the browns, choose a brown to start. I'm not going to worry about my colored highlights. I'm just going to do some base color here. Another way, let's see, to keep this color under control, since we have this separated on its own layer, I'm going to push this lock here, and all that means is everything that I do to this image is not going to go past the pixels that are already there. And that'll help us stay in the lines really easily. And let's begin. I've got some browns. I'm just going to go over them here. And what this is doing is it's, of course, adding a brown tint, but ignoring all of the work I did on my values study. So all the value I put in is staying there, and it's just giving me lighter and darker versions of this color. I'll come to the sand. I'm going to add a little yellow. I'm going to gray it out a little. So this is giving us a base color. We can ignore all of the values. Because those will stay. You know, and I said I wanted to modify this tree, which I still haven't done. I'm just going to do that really fast. Filter, liquefy. This one bulges things. This one reduces things. Or minimize, I don't know the term they use. Actually, let's just find out what they use. Pucker. Bloat. I'm going to do a bit of puckering and a bit of bloating just to make this tree look a little more organic, because we got a little too formulaic. And we need it to look a little more natural for our purposes. All right. And yeah, that's good enough. All right, now we're going to keep on with our coloring. Going to put some soft blue on that sand. But not too much. add some reds in that tree. Nope. Didn't work out. And the ocean. It's a really lousy plain ocean. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to add a color to the sky. And actually, rather than try to paint over that, I'm just going to choose my colors for the sky here. And I'll gradient those together. Oop, not that. I should have turned the lock off before I did this. Oh well. We'll take care of that with a little bit of erasing. Okay, no, that's not perfect again, but that's all right. Let me just go to switch the brush mode back to normal. I'm going to come along these areas again. Just do a little bit of touch up. Okay, progress. Now what we're going to do is make another snapshot. Again, see how far we've come. That's kind of fun. Okay. And now we can I'm just going to combine. I'll get rid of these lines. We don't need those. We've got these together. I'll merge those at this point. And we'll save that back there. We can get rid of these three. So we've got foreground. Oh, hold on a second. We lost our tree. Make a snapshot of this. I'm just going to come back in here into this world. And I've got my tree line in here. I'll select this and copy it. Now we'll come back to this snapshot and paste it. Oop, nope. Wait a second. I copied the wrong thing. Let's see. Hello world. Tree line. This is what I need copied. I didn't select the layer. Copy this. Paste in place. Put it in the front. All right, we've got our tree back. Not a problem. Just hide that for now. Okay, so before we work on adding that tree, what I would do at this point is come with my painting tools with different brushes and start painting this over the top in almost one final round of painting, because the painting, of course, is not going to just be one type of brown that is lighter and darker. It needs to have a lot of subtle hues in there, including our light and shadow that we will add in a bit. So next I'm coming to this area. I'll go ahead and lock this later. I'm not going to do the liquefy like I've done a few times already. I'm just going to work with it as is. Now I'll take this brush, this erodible round 3, and I'll be working with that, and I'm going to start pushing some of the highlights and shadows, but this time using color as well. So let me just get a color in here, come down here, bring it into the reds a little more, and I'll start pushing those highlights and shadows. So at this point it's painting over the top of our texture. I've got it on a separate layer in case I change my mind, but I want those highlights and shadows to be stronger, and then I'll do the alternate light sources. So I'm coming in here with some shading. So I'm adding some stronger color here. I'm just not going to press down as hard to get in some of those more rich browns that we might find on this tree. Going to push it into the orange zone a little bit. Let's let that fade away toward the top. Okay. Okay, it's looking pretty good on the tree. Need to work on my sand a little bit. Going to kick over to my splatter brush. And push this area a little lighter over here. Okay, now we're going to add some highlights and shadow. Make a new layer for that. I'll come to my the regular brush that I've been using here, and I'm going to add some highlight and shadow. We'll start with the atmospheric reflections of the blue of the ocean. This place is surrounded by ocean. Just going to let that catch the front of the tree. I'm going to reflect that into the sand a bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. We need the yellow from the sun. That's going to be from this area. I am defaulting back to that after all. I'm going to brighten this up a little. Too much over here. Eraser tool, the soft one, I'll turn the flow way down. You can just kind of gently erase it. Okay, that'll work. Back to brush. All right. Okay, and I'm going to just have a little bit of warm reflected light here. And a bit here. Okay. And the purple from the top. Okay. See how that went. Not bad. I wonder what that would look like with the different blending mode. Lighten, screen, color dodge, color burn. Not bad. Multiply, overlay, normal, color burn, turn it down. I'm going to duplicate it, give this one overlay, put that under the color burn, and I'm going to duplicate it, put this one at the top and give it normal. Here, and I'll turn some of these others down. No, turn down more. And burn. Let's turn that down. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm going to merge this all to another copy. Merge. Okay, now I have this all flattened on one layer. Mostly. I'll accept the background, of course. Now, I'm going to manipulate this layer. I'm going to take another snapshot. Let's look at our progress. Come a long way today. So I've got it all on one layer, and I'm going to Command L. Now let's actually save this as well. And let's do a save as. 1, and we'll save it as a 2. Because we're about to do some destructive editing. What destructive editing means is you can't go back from it. I'm just pushing Command L to get up levels, and I know there's the non-destructive way to do levels, but we're just going to cut to the chase here. If I don't like it, I'll go back to a save file. Making that lighting a little more moody. I'm going to get the curves, Command M for curves. I'm going to pull this down a little bit. Okay, let's see how that looks. I like it. Got a little bit of contamination in here. But it's not on here. We're going to be tricky. I'm going to hold down Command. This is making a selection of this whole layer. But I'm going to switch to this layer. I'm going to push Command Shift I to select the inverse and delete to clean up that edge. Sneaky. Okay, so to add this tree, all I would do is paint behind this level layer. I'd add the shading on the right side. I'd add the lighting effects and maybe try some different brushes for some different texture in here. And then I would keep this on a separate layer so that when I bring it into the game, it would be on a separate layer. And I think that's as far as I'm going to take this background today. I hope that gave you just some ideas on how to do technique. There's more that can be done to this scene. I can add water effects. I can work on a variety of cloud formations in the sky. But I think you get the gist of some practice techniques and in how you can use Photoshop to manipulate things like lighting and texture, even above and beyond drawing in the traditional sense or painting in the traditional sense. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a thumbs up, a like, or a comment below, and I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're making some awesome art. Talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.